say on your website says that it's a tribute to your father, who was a painter and a sculptor, and then your mother, who's a ceramicist and a painter, and actually a founder of the Painting Center.
Yeah, she is.
And so that's a pretty hardcore art background. And I think that it was also this kite where you said, sorry, you said sounds so accusatory, where sewing techniques are applied from family, from generations of the family. And so, would you talk about growing up in this family of artists and your history and location and kind of formative influences as an artist?
Sure. So as Elisabeth said, I grew up in a family of artists, and my great-grandmother, my father's grandmother, was an itinerant storyteller and cartoonist, and she would travel all over the country in the 19-teens and 20s drawing. She wasn't trained, but she would draw and tell stories, and she would draw and the story would happen and then the piece would be discarded. So I don't have any of these pictures. I just have her brochures that show her drawings, which were very primitive, but it was more about the event of making than the product. And then my parents themselves, my father was like 24 when I was born, my mother was 25, and they were both young artists in New York. And then we moved out to New Mexico, and then my dad became a teacher at Williams College. And so all of a sudden we were now in this like absolutely bucolic town where it's like there's mountains and a valley, and I just ran wild till I was about 12 in nature and exploring woods and all of that. And it was a very formative time for me. And then when I was 12, something very dramatic happened, which was that my parents decided that we were leaving the country, and we moved to New York. And as a lot of you probably know from when we were kids, when you leave a place, there's no email, you write a letter, you're 12 years old, you're going to keep in touch with your friends through a letter. So it was a complete severance. I actually went back to Williamstown once after that, and then as an adult much later. But while I was in Williamstown, my dad would do this yearly kite making group with the kids. And so every year we would make kites, and then all the students would make kites, and a lot of the kites were really terrible. They would all fall apart and break because they were made by students. They looked cool, but they didn't fly. And one year, my father and I made this very large black kite that had red streamers. It was made out of paper, but it looked sort of similar to this, probably much larger and out of paper and not with glue and all of that. And I started thinking at a certain point about this memory, because my work always involves like nature and then also memory and how those things start to intersect. I started thinking a lot about my father, who had died in 2006, my memories of him, this idea of the kite as like hope and ambition and love and ascension, all of these very positive attributes, but also about embedded in that this idea of loss and failure, a kite that doesn't fly. So that became the genesis for me of making these kites. And I made 3 kites. This is the second, and that's the third, based on this idea of the kite, of that black star kite. And then from there, I started making that one, and there's a yellow one, and then there's a whole bunch that we didn't end up showing, of various kite forms that are more abstract, often based on birds. But when I got to New York, my world kind of opened up in a really different way. I was going to music and art, which is now LaGuardia. It was like the 80s, and there was a lot of wildness in the city. And that really impacted me as well. I mean, I used to talk, oh, the bucolic past, but also I would go to, you know, lots of, like, see lots of edgy shows, and, you know, it was a very different experience, which has also informed the work, too, you know.
We'll get into that.
Yeah.
Wall works for a minute.
Okay.
The bluebird kite, but I want to go to first, I think this is the earliest work in the show, this one, which isn't a kite, in the back on that wall, this wall. And it's called A Tree That Bends with the Wind, because I feel like in a way it's a portal to the show, or at least chronologically. So can you talk a little bit about that?
About that piece?
Yeah.
Right, so I try to work as improvisationally as possible. I don't always do it. Sometimes I have a plan and I work from the plan. But I feel like when I get too much into the plan, I need to step back and work purely improvisationally. So I had made a very large painting, and the painting was really not working. It was really bad. It was actually supposed to be a sculpture, and it was very complicated. So I started cutting it up, and I had this panel, and I liked the panel, and then it, you know, I really have like a love-hate relationship with painting. Like, I don't really want to be a painter. I'm always like hovering on the edge of being a painter. So I stopped using stretcher bars. I stopped gessoing. I stopped doing these things that I attached to like the traditional language of painting. But it needed a finish, so I just sewed pieces onto it to sort of see if it would become something else. So it's just really a lucky accident.
Okay, but you recognized it.
Yeah.
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 All right, so moving into just some books. Lost and stay on nature for a while. All right, so Lost and Found by Catherine Schultz is a book that you mentioned in our preliminary conversations towards this, and she talks about, everybody okay out there? She talks about loss and love, you know, like the huge spectrum, the sliding scale, happening simultaneously, how everything is tied together. And she talks about the and as a principle not only of, where is it? Okay. That whole quote is somewhere else. But it's and as a conjunction, and it's also as an extension of time, is basically what she's saying. And that's something that you've been talking about a lot. And I would like to hear about interconnectedness in terms of how the flowers take us, how this flower in particular, the cosmos, tale of the cosmos, greets us at the door. I mean, it's a very different view right now because this room is full, but when you walk into the room empty, the face greets you, and then you follow it around, and there's this whole passage, and we end up in the planets. And so I'm wondering how and works in with that, or sliding scale of things and interconnectedness.
Right. So I think going back to the idea of like, I guess I'm just like a very uncomfortable person, so I don't really want to be a sculptor or a painter or a craft person, but I like to draw on all of these different things. And the word and for me is actually an interesting place to locate myself, like to think about existing on the conjunction instead of on the two separate things, if that makes sense. So for me, like the subject of the work is like the thing and the thing, but it's actually how those two things come together is really what the part that's the most interesting to me. And so, like in all of the work that I do, it's often contains opposites, and it goes way back into like the early work that I made, but there were always like light and dark, inside and outside, up and down, and the and is the word that connects those two things. And I like the neutrality of it, how you can basically, and she talks about this in the book, how you can take pretty much any two things and create a relationship. And what is that relationship about? Like, what, that's where the art kind of exists. So as a subject matter, like this obviously it's like a flower and it's a cosmos, but the flower is big and the cosmos is small and they're connected. So that's kind of the idea of that. And there's a front and a back, and those are the relationships that very simply get set.
It's almost like the pivot of the show, when you pass from the front to the back. It's almost like you're going through the portal of the flower. That seems to be a submotif that's just coming to me now in the portal. All right. I can go to scale change, or I can go to earlier work.
Well, let's talk about the earlier work.
Let's talk about the
Yeah.
earlier work.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Yes, I just. Do you want to just talk about it?
Yeah, I'll just jump
Yeah.
in. So the word "and," was thinking about this because I really enjoyed the questions that you sent me, and I spent the last week just kind of like really rehashing, like, what that? I mean, when you're in the studio, you just make stuff. You don't really, at least for me, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just like, oh, this looks cool, I'll make it. And then afterwards, you start to figure out what it is that you're actually doing, if it makes sense or not. But the earlier work that I was making, coming out of graduate school, was this like late 90s, early 2000s, was based on this idea of the looking glass. And I was really involved with Alice in Wonderland. And in the book, there's this idea of becoming, and that's again like this word "and," where there are different states, and you're moving between these different states. And so when I go back and look at those earlier pieces, they had a lot of mirroring that happened. Like I did a large wall installation where there's a living room that mirrors back and forth. And that becomes like a space of becoming. And there's a plane where in Alice in Wonderland there's like the real world and the non-real world, and there's sense and then there's nonsense, and how those two things start to collide. And I feel like with this work I'm still playing with that idea of states or processes, that things can move from one location to the other. And it could happen through image, but it can also happen through moving between painting and sculpting and sewing and things of that nature. I don't know if that really answered your question.
Well, I mean, I kind of want to dig deeper. When you talk about the living room piece, is it? I have to see. I'm so literary, you guys. I'm sorry. No, it's okay. I have the script and just have to kind of plunk along with it. Forgive me.
Well, there's also the way I dealt with nature early on. We could talk about that.
Well, you ask me and then you answer me. I mean, it's good. You're on top of it. I just wanted to check in on that living room work.
Okay.
Was that? Was it Plastic Replicating Garden, or was it Looking Glass House?
It was Looking Glass.
So Looking Glass House in 1998 was a 132-foot mural at the old thread waxing space for those of us who are knocking around Soho. And it's really complicated. Photo-derived, massive mural, but many, many layers. So the living room is not a simple thing. And in describing that piece, you wrote that they were historical homes depicted, but that they were all surface, never depth, and you wrote access denied.
Mm-hmm.
So there was something digital about it, like early days of digital, but there was also, and in subsequent exhibitions and works like Plastic Replicating Garden, which was a gallery exhibition of, as you imagine, a replicating garden, but very digitized. And also Tropicalia at
It was all
Roland Hall.
digital.
Yeah, and Tropicalia was in 2001. So this feeling of access denied, but now you talk about the work in such a different kind of a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to go through my notes again to find out exactly. But you talk about it in, well, like in this liminal way, that access has everything to do with it, like in both the materials, but then also in the way that you allow it to flow between things. And I'm just making comments. We're going back to the original question about looking glass house. But the way you let things rest between media, and the way that they're paint. You said something about remaking nature off kilter, so that you're remaking it. But in Looking Glass House, you're saying access denied. So can you talk about access denied to remaking nature off kilter?
Gosh, okay.
Does that make sense to you? It's just how did you get from there?
How did I get from here to that? I mean, those pieces were, I mean, the living room especially was about having nothing, and it was, they were early American interiors, super fancy. And I felt like at the time I was really poor. I was, living in a little apartment, and I wanted to create like this environment that was scaled so that you could almost jump into it. But then it's also just like a picture on the wall, and I was interested in that tension. But in the, I don't know about the access denied. I mean, that I'm kind of struggling with actually.
Okay.
I don't. Like, it was part of that, but it's also about surface, and I was playing a lot with, what's on one side of the surface and what's on the other.
I think that's what it means.
It stayed very surface oriented.
I think that's what it meant.
And it related to, I guess, in terms of bringing it back to nature and like the plastic replicating garden and the digital space, is that it was very removed, and I felt very removed from those places, and whether it was nature or a fancy living room or whatever it is, there was access denied to me as well. And then coming into this body of work, I mean, it's so informed by a very different experience of nature. And in those early pieces, I was living in the city, and I didn't have access to, being outside and all of that. So I was looking at nature as an image, as a vista, working from mostly photographs. So I would stand, I would take a picture, and then it's like one point perspective, and then you build it out from there. I would take a photograph, I would digitally manipulate it, shut it down, make it access denied, and then paint from there. So there were all of these steps. But I took a very long break at one point from about 2008 to 2014 because of my family and my kid. And when I came back to painting, I just didn't want to make that work anymore. I just was like, fuck it, I don't want to do that. So I changed drastically. And part of it was looking at, I decided to start again by just painting abstractly and just getting used to materials and seeing how that felt. And then from there, I saw the Hilma Af Klim show, and then I saw this Vivian Suter show, and like things started like really clicking with me about what kind of work I wanted to make. And so, and I was also now gardening. I had finally achieved my dream of like returning to my lost homeland of the countryside. So I was gardening, and I was like working in the soil and digging, and I had a very different relationship to nature. It wasn't an image anymore. It wasn't a projection. It was more real. And so then things started to change and develop. It made me want to make sculpture and more materially based painting.
That's really interesting, and I was just returning to this first one from 2021 for a moment. The scalloped edges are kind of like a scalloped door in Tropicalia.
Oh.
In Tropicalia, there was a wall painted with...
It was green.
I'm having a hard time
Palm
with language.
trees.
Yeah, it was like silhouettes, a silhouetted landscape on green, but there was this undulating part left by the door, and now the petals of the flowers. It's like a framing device.
Yeah.
That's not a question, but No, you can answer it. No, I'm not telling you. I'm just playing.
That's funny.
Okay. So the garden, you have like 9 or 6 flowers and 6 brands of trees. And Hilma Off Clint has another show at MoMA, if you guys have seen it, where she has botanical illustrations of the flowers, and then she has these things called guidelines, which are these chart-like graphs for characteristics of plants. So she has the bellflower, I think, which you also grow. The guideline for bellflower is the inability to use one's innate aptitude. And milkweed, which you grow, and she did too. She cites it as a guideline for humility, caution, tact, and accuracy. So that this interconnectedness that she has, I think, has been ascribed to her spiritual beliefs. But I've heard you say that you're not spiritual, but you do love interconnectedness. So be that as it may, can you speak to this? What do you think about Hilma Off Clint's categorizations?
Yeah, so I think the spiritual part of it, I always ascribe spirituality to organized religion, and that's something that I have a little bit of a problem with. And I don't really know how to define my spirituality. If that exists, I don't know. But with Hilma Off Clint, I think she is trying to look at matter and see how the spirit kind of appears through matter, and that is something that is interesting to me. That, you know, you have these kinds of could be abstract ideas or a feeling about the universe or something like that, and that it could actually exist in something small, in the garden or some kind of matter. And I love that first show. That was really amazing, and it really blew my mind, the scale and the color and the sort of sinuous, linear quality of all that she was doing, the abstraction. But when you go into this show now, that is up now, which is actually a later piece, those drawings were made in 2019, I think. Yeah.
19, like, Creed over one.
Yeah, it was
1919.
It was 1919. Yeah, it was 1919, and the other ones, the large ones, were made, about 5 or 10 years earlier. And she was always broke and trying to do projects and get money to further her vision, which is wonderful. But when she looks at these particular flowers, and if anyone spends time really trying to understand a flower, for example, it does have characteristics. Like I don't know if I would ascribe the same characteristics that she does to those plants, but plants do have these characteristics, and I could see how someone would then start to ascribe a way of being in the world. Like some plants are very aggressive, some plants serve a real purpose with pollinators and stuff like that. And so, that's a really interesting thing to think about. It's very human-like, how each one of us kind of has a role in society, and I think she's making those connections, which is fascinating to me.
Because you can make them too.
Yeah, I see that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the bellflower, for example, she has a bellflower that is a very tame bellflower, which is nice. But the bellflower that I have is like a weed and very aggressive and has to be constantly removed because it will take over, because it's a European invasive transplant. So,
Yeah.
it's just interesting.
It's really interesting. It makes me think about scale changes, and that I have a quote from Catherine Schultz. One of the many ways that loss instructs us is by correcting our sense of scale, showing us the world as it really is, so enormous, complex, and mysterious that there is nothing too large to be lost, and conversely, no place too small for something to get lost there. a missing wedding ring can turn the modest geography of an urban park into the Rocky Mountains. Like awe and grief, to which is closely related, loss has the power to larger than when something important goes missing. And so I'm curious about how the show is installed. I mean, you're talking about scale changes within the making of the work, within the work that you've done in the past to the present. So I'm curious about the history of the installation, or how you arrived at such a flawless installation.
We rehung it 4 times.
It was not easy.
It was collaborative. I did 2 alternate hangings, and I said, Cadence, come take a look. I have these 2 alternate hangings, and one was sort of more formal, and one was much more loose. And she came in, and she was like, and so I said, okay, I'm going to go in the back, and you hang it the way you think it should be hung, because I don't know, what I'm doing, how, because I knew I wasn't doing it quite right. And so I went in the back, and I came back, she, said, I'm ready, and I came back around and I said, I see what it is that you want. It didn't end up being hung that way, but there were elements of her hanging that I then incorporated into the final hang, because I finally understood kind of what she was going for. And then she came back, and I was like, oh my God, and is she going to like it? And she came through the door, and she went, ah. So then I knew that it was just right. So it really was collaborative.
Yeah. So it was really nice having Andrea do the installation, because other times, like those earlier shows, I did everything. Like I planned the show in advance and followed out the plan and knew where every painting was going to go beforehand. And I'm trying not to be so, controlling like that. So, it was good to see how someone else could envision the work. But one of the there's a few different ideas. The first one that we talked about was having these pedestals made. I wanted the pedestals to be low, because I like the idea of looking down on the flowers instead of having them face you at face height. I feel like that's really important, because it creates a change in your body that you have to feel kind of more compassion for the thing that you're looking at. So that was important to me. And then with the paintings, that one is dark. That's Night Swim. And then this is the day. So there's like night and day. And then there's the cosmos. And then there's the cosmos. And then there's a few other things like the birds and stuff that are more sky related. And I guess that one just kind of grounds.
I can just say one thing that I noticed, because when I was hanging the show, everything, all of these objects and kites and the flowers, they all, and the little piece in the corner there, they all had so much of a sense of kind of personage somehow. I don't know, like faces, or like they felt like they were looking at me as I was, moving them around. And then they looked like they were looking at each other, So there was a dynamic in hanging the work that I had never encountered before. This is one of the things that kind of, was a challenge for me, because usually when I hang a show, things are kind of just themselves, and they interrelate and they have a conversation. But in this case, it was like they had an attitude towards each other. Mm-hmm. And so trying to hang a show that is, I don't know, where that the energy between pieces is, I don't know, it's a good relationship. I don't know how else to put it. That took some thought and consideration and collaboration.
Yeah. Like this flower looks over at this one, and that the idea with this flower too is that it greets you, and then actually you have to walk around and you have this other experience from seeing it on the sides. So yeah.
I'm thinking about self-containment. That I'm thinking about what Anne Marie is saying about the work having a live relationship to each other, and I felt that very strongly with that flower. And the piece, which I forgot about because I can't see
Oh,
it.
the little heart.
Yeah, the changing the flower, that's like a puzzle. You press it and it can turn around from day to night, but it's a secret that's in the corner of the room. But I can see, I mean, again, it was also like a portal, like that front face, and so I'm formulating some thought about self-possession versus the live quality, and wondering if you experience it.
That the pieces have.
That they're not objects.
Oh, yeah, they have, for me, they're very personified. So they become, especially the sculptural pieces, they feel like a being that I'm somehow giving this life to. So yeah, and I try and make them feel a little bit like animalistic, or it's like that flower, this one here, for example, it doesn't have any leaves. This part kind of acts like this kind of saucy leg that's kind of standing up. The flower is like a little bit too stiff and has attitude, and so that's something that I want. Like I'm not really interested in just making like a pretty flower that just, I don't know. I can't really say exactly what it is, but yeah, it has to have this kind of animalistic quality. I like that.
I like that answer.
Yeah.
And what about artistic influences? Because when you were talking about the leg draped like this, I thought of Guston.
Oh yeah, I like Guston too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked about it a lot, but maybe we should talk about it again.
About what?
Artistic influences.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So the artistic influences are, we've said, how Hilma F. Klimt, certainly. And then the Vivian Suter really blew my mind. I don't know if anyone saw that show. It was at Paula Cooper Gallery. And for me, it was really important because I had been making these like little paintings, and I wanted them to be small with cheap materials so I could move fast through my ideas. But when I saw those hanging pieces, it really inspired me to then just go and get fabric and just paint. And she had also, I liked that she was working outdoors, and she was working in Guatemala, which is a place that I had spent a lot of time in when I was in my early 20s. And so it was very important to me for that reason. The work doesn't look like her work. It's like framed on the wall and all of that, but it was really important for me to see the freeness of that, and the kind of throwaway quality was something I really wanted to bring to the work. And then, of course, I've looked at a lot of the pattern and decoration people. I mean, that's definitely something that informs me. And then the true touchstone is really Matisse. I mean, I've loved him since I was in college or before. And the kind of sensuality and the color palette, and I just, it's something I've returned to again and again.
Do you have a period?
I have my favorite painting is, I think I've lived in New York for so long that a lot of my favorite things really are in MoMA, because I've looked at them again and again. And my favorite piece in MoMA is that Moroccan's painting, that really black Moroccan painting. I love that painting so much. But I also love the piano players and the piano lesson, a lot of different pieces.
And that brings us to the Gap.
Okay.
Which I think is a really interesting idea, both visually and conceptually. Conceptually, you've described a gap as something important, like where memory is faulty, and gaps occur, and you allow that in the work. So, and then you talked about it vis-a-vis Matisse.
Right. So it has to do with emotion too. I realized after I was talking to you that emotion and memory, I think, are really entwined. And I know, I like going to the idea of the gap. When you feel something really strongly, like whether it's love or loss, it really changes your perception of reality, and so you could go backwards to a memory of something, but you don't really remember it correctly. There are all these gaps in it because somehow the emotion of it clouds everything, and that I'm really interested in. And so when I look at this is about how the gap exists in the Matisse, is that one of the things that I started reading about a long time ago, and I was trying to trace where it comes from. I think it comes from Barbara Rose writing in the 1980s. That was the only place I could find this reference. But it's the idea in the Matisse drawing of the discontinuous line. And so when he draws, there are these gaps in the line, and like the gap becomes this space where vision can enter into, like the vision, it's complicated. So you're looking at me like, what?
Keep going, keep going. It's really interesting.
No,
this is good.
Yeah. So there's a gap in the space. You as the viewer, Heather, draw in your mind the line between where those two lines don't connect, and then you become part of the making of the piece. And so trying to make work that has these gaps in it, these spaces where maybe I don't remember everything that happened, and instead of like working like someone who's maybe a more representational painter or sculptor and filling in the gaps, like, well, I don't really remember what happened, but I'll make this happen. I just leave it empty and leave it open. And then I think what happens is it's closer to my own experience, but I also think it leaves space for other people to enter into the work more. And so that's kind of what the gap is for me.
Yeah. All right. You want to take questions from
Yeah,
other
I
people?
guess if anyone has a question, I'm happy to answer.
Or comments?
Can you talk about night swim?
Sure. So the painting was made like I was basically throwing fabric down onto the floor and just painting with no really conscious ideas to begin with. I made a lot of these paintings, and only a few of them became sewn into, kind of more finished works. And so what I did is I just tossed it down and I painted it. And then when it was done, it was one of the ones that I felt like there was something there that I wanted to go further with. And for me, the idea of the painting has to do with memories I have of swimming at night, which were kind of really exhilarating, but also really frightening for me, because I always start imagining all this stuff in the water, like the creatures and so the red and blue forms kind of for me are like maybe fish underwater, maybe bugs on the surface of the water. I don't know. That's mine. So, and then the white pieces are the way that the moon kind of shines on the water and makes those kind of shards of light, and then the waves, of course, reference water.
Somebody came into the gallery who also swims at night and said that she could really feel the black edges, the way that when you're swimming at night, it's dark around you. She really connected with it.
It's kind of an enveloping feeling, for sure.
Could you talk about the scallops? Because the egg said you've been in that one.
The scalp?
Well,
Oh,
what
this
I-
kind
yeah,
of
the
earthy
shape.
thing? Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, I think it's just like it's like something Matisse would do, I think, right? Like I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I also think it's Tropicalia.
Oh, yeah.
I'm super excited about that. I'm not letting it go.
I mean, it's also like it's a body thing too, like that's just like a really good, it feels good to make that shape. I don't know.
It's like
you know?
swimming.
Yeah. And then it's like a scale thing. I think Elisabeth came to my studio in Brooklyn once, and I had all of these pieces, and they were all different scales. Like I was trying to figure out the the scale of this. So I would make it and I would put it up and then I rip it off and then I change it again. And that's kind of just, how I do it. Like I would try several. Sometimes you get it the first time. I mean, all of the pieces, I like this one too. It's like I did the cosmos and I made it, it was like this big and I was like, it doesn't look right. It's too shiny, it's like too small. And part of the process is I just rip it off and fix it. And so with these paintings, the same thing happens, that, I just play with it until it's right. I know with water I wanted this kind of wavy thing. I'm always more attracted to a curve versus a straight line.
So a waveform has periodicity, so there's,
Yeah.
so it's sort of about time, it's about
Yeah.
time on some level.
Right, like in math, those sine curves,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Other questions?
I was interested in what you were saying earlier about the and, because you're always doing two opposites, front and back, up and down, as opposed to, and I was thinking, well, how does peace and love fit into that? Because it's two things that are the same. So, but you're specifically using and as a
Well,
joining opposites, and maybe that's part of the flowers with attitude thing, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I do mostly use them as opposites, but I really like the neutrality of the word, that like any two things can go together, and also the idea of continuity too. It's like one of the really interesting things in the book, which is Lost and Found, is that she talks about the alphabet.
Two opposites.
Lost
and found.
Well,
But
yes.
it's happening
It's
simultaneously. is what I'm showing.
simultaneous is the idea that it's simultaneous and both at the same time. But the continuity thing comes in, and this was a fact that I found really fascinating, is that the alphabet originally was Z and then there was an ampersand at the end of it. And so there was and, which was like per se, and so there's the continuity. And then at a certain point, in like the 1800s or something, they dropped the and then it just became Z, which is how we know the alphabet. But it was this idea that like there's all of this, and then there was this symbol that was also attached to an alphabet that symbolized continuation. And then as a conjunction, like in language, there are a lot of conjunctions like yet and but, or, you can think of a million of them. Or not a million, but a number of them. And then and has that neutrality to it. And so for me, yeah, it's mostly opposites, but, I don't know, yeah.
It's just interesting.
Yeah.
I also think about the hyphen, the M dash, the N dash, you're also using that sort of gesturally, and that also was showing up in kind of a fascinating way. When you started talking about the and, it was like I started seeing in your mark making, I actually see sort of the way you can break a word as well as a concept. It's also
Yeah, I think,
embodied in some way.
yeah, I mean, I think too, it's like my own, everyone makes work from their own personality, and I think I have like a kind of like unsureness about myself, or a hesitancy, and so like I feel more comfortable when I'm like in those in-between spaces. Like even with the art making, I'm not, like I really love painting, like, but I'm not a painter, and I don't feel like I can enter into that painting dialogue. I don't feel confident enough to do that. And the same thing with the sculpture, or the same thing with the craft. I feel better in those kind of in-between spaces, which for me is like attached to that and word.
But I would argue that you are a painter, and you are a sculptor, and you
And.
are, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
a pretty powerful, and then whether that's the gap or whether it's really a
Yeah.
powered
Yeah.
space.
Barry Schwabsky, for one of our shows, he wrote an essay and he coined the phrase thought object. And I think by that he meant that the thought and the feeling come first, and then the object becomes kind of the embodiment of the thought or feeling. Is that something that you can relate to? Because that's something I get from the at least I've been inferring from the work as I've
Yeah.
spent time with
Yeah, I
That-
think
it.
absolutely.
But like, they take the form they need to
Right.
in order to convey the thought and feeling,
Yeah.
thought and feeling. Because,
Mhm.
yeah, they have both. And when you, I hope all of you, if you haven't yet, when we're, you know, you take the chairs away, that you'll take a look at the piece in the corner that's called Flower That Contains the Sky Day and Night. This is something that when people come into the space, I often will turn around because it does have two sides. And it's more two-sided than in a round. So it's sort of a painting with two sides. It's also a mobile. It's also a sculpture. It's also a flower. It's also a creature. And it's also a rainbow.
Mhm.
And the sky.
Mhm.
And so this is what I say, and I feel like that piece has, over time, spending time with it, it has told me all of these things about itself. You didn't tell me that,
No.
but it told me that. And so when people come in, I love to engage with it and
Yeah.
engage with its multiplicity of states.
Right. Right. It's always, it's in between everything.
It is all of these things at once.
Yeah.
So words that have popped up in my mind, and I love that you love Vivian Suter's, like, I love hearing the influences because I love some of the same people that you respond to, their work. Indeterminacy is, as one word, and hybridity, and I kind of just feel in general like we're in a period of time where different cultural experiences, we're trying to break down these kind of box notions. They take a very, very long time, I think, to come out of. Like we're sort of, and a book, because you mentioned that other book, it made me think of this book that I have really loved and I wanted to share. Notes on Complexity. You know, and so it's it's Neil Tice or Thies, actually is a New Yorker. But it's a very short book, but it's extremely so rich. And he's trying to explain complexity theory to just non-science people. But there's this wonderful part in it which tries to explain something in physics that they've come to understand, and the idea of particle and wave it's the same thing. I mean, it's not one or the other. So it made me think of this embeddedness behind what you're talking about, that's very real, that is now something for a number of years people have been actually uncovering and understanding. So things don't exist in one state, they're always existing in both states. You can't actually ever capture it. And that somehow felt, I wanted to share it with you because it feels a lot like something that's sort of in there with what you're talking about or
Yeah.
speaking to.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I've read a little bit about it, so it's not totally unfamiliar, but I don't know that book. And it sounds fantastic. Yeah.
I think it's great that Andrea brought up Harry Schwabsky too, because he's fascinating and he's such a wordsmith. But I think your work is so fascinating on a level of objecthood, and he often describes things as not just being what they are, but staking a position about what they are. So say stating a position about objecthood. And I think it also brings in some of those nuances too. Like sitting here, it's unbelievable to see that you place these things, stacked on top, that nuance. Like this petal has the other one on top of it. And so does that one, the complexity. And the nature, like you talked about, that object, living as an object with that sort of complexity and potential is fascinating. It makes you look at not just flowers themselves as maybe this animate character, but objecthood too, so staking a position. And I think using all of these dimensional elements also does that. Everything here has a super inventive objectness. Like that kite, being able to look at it for that long, and that is so inventive, it's hard to believe.
Which one?
This one
The
right here, sorry.
oh,
ending
yeah.
in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
And they're beautifully made, and I was gonna, I had a chance to look at them closely, and so I was gonna, I love Vivian Suter's work, but I also know like, there's a sort of different energy that she throws into that work, or puts into it, and that you put that sort of idea you were talking about with personality, and that we're sort of always excavating ourselves, and that you put like, you know, you're not comfortable with the craft or these different things, but they come through because you care about that with material. That to me really comes through.
So like the idea of care is actually like really important to me. And just to acknowledge, like, it's very strange making this like pretty work in the context of what's going on in the world at large. But I have this feeling that has to do with trying to be in the world in a very, like, tread lightly, give care, listen, you know, all of those kinds of qualities. And I think that when we're in such a complicated space politically and with the environment and all of that, I have to do it. And so those early pieces, like Tropicalia, was based on like I went to an amusement park in India, and I took pictures, and I used foam and plastic, and it was very commercial, all commercial products about plasticity. And now I try and use like I use toxic material. I mean, I have paint, that's acrylic, blah blah blah, but I try and reduce my material sensibility as much as possible, and try and make work that's almost like an antidote to kind of what I see in the larger world. So I don't want people to think that I'm just like in La La Land, like not.
I want to say this. I ran into Cadence at the last two big marches here in New York City. Both of us carrying personals.
Can I read something that Cadence wrote? Can I read
Yeah,
something that
absolutely.
Cadence?
And then I think
Just as a way to.
Yeah, absolutely.
My use of materials is also interconnected. I like the paint to stain the surface so it becomes a part of it and doesn't lay on top like a skin. I like sewing, but not so much that the work looks like a sewing project. I use it primarily for construction. In the studio, I work in circles, moving between building, painting, sewing, and exploring new ideas, and then returning to beginnings and revisiting previous ideas. I don't really know where to locate the work. Returning to the idea of becoming, I like things to live in this mid-state, where it is not really a painting, but it is painted. It looks like a kite, but it doesn't function as a kite. It is a flower, but it resembles a creature or becomes a place. It is in this mid-state that the idea of interconnection becomes most clear. The subject of the work is the connection between things as much as the obvious thing itself.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you all.
So a couple of things. One, again, thank you so much for coming out. We're going to fold the chairs up, not yet, and bring them out into the hallway. There are refreshments, there's nibbles if you're hungry, if there's both alcoholic and non-alcoholic refreshments, drinks, fizzy water and still. And then in the back, there are a few pieces. I would ask that not everybody rush into the back, but maybe you could kind of drift in, which means I hope you will stay and enjoy the last hour of the show. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, thanks so much.
I realize I'm